Welcome to this NCFE video focusing on maximising success in the Healthcare Science T-Level core component exams. This video applies the tips given for the multiple choice, short answer and long answer questions from the Maximising Success for the Health and Science T-Levels video to Healthcare Science examples. Here is an example of a multiple choice question around personal protective equipment. Firstly, we are going to try and answer the question before checking the options. Therefore, using learning from A3, Health, Safety and Environmental Regulations in the health and science sector, we know the PPE at Work regulations defines employers' responsibilities to provide appropriate personal protective equipment to reduce harm to employees, visitors and clients. To double check this answer, or if you're not sure on what the answer is, it's good practice to eliminate the other answers. Option A is incorrect as it applies to the Reporting of Injuries, Diseases and Dangerous Occurrences Regulations 2013, or RIDDLE. Option C applies to the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. And option D applies to the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. Using this reasoning and having confidently eliminated the other answers, we can now choose the correct option, which in this case is option B. Now let's take a look at an example of a short answer question. In this question, students are presented with the context of a 34-year-old female admitted to accident and emergency with a blood pressure of 84/52 following a motorcycle accident. In terms of context, the female clearly has an abnormally low blood pressure which relates to the accident. In relation to this context, the question asks students to suggest the most likely cause of this abnormal blood pressure measurement and an appropriate intervention to correct the blood pressure. First, it's important to identify the command word used in the question, so we know what's required in our answer. In this case, it's suggest, which shows that we must present a possible cause or solution and apply knowledge to a new situation to provide a reasoned explanation. A detailed list of command verbs can be found in the support materials section of the NCFE Qual Hub page for the Healthcare Science T-Level. It's important to use plain and direct language when answering this question. Use short and succinct statements to answer this question. Based on the context of the question, the likely cause of the low blood pressure is a hemorrhage or bleeding. This would achieve the first mark. To achieve the second mark, the student must state an intervention such as locating or stopping the bleeding or replacing the blood loss. These two statements together would achieve 2 marks. Also, remember the key terms from the question. For this question, the mark scheme uses intervention, which is a key term taken from the question itself. Finally, we are going to look at how to answer an extended answer question. First thing to check is what the question is asking to be addressed, as there can be some examples which could easily be missed, and therefore a 3-step approach might be useful. Step 1 is to identify the content areas that the questions are addressing so that relevant knowledge can be used, and circling and highlighting on the paper is encouraged for this. Next step is to identify the circumstances. So if it's a comparison, then what is the circumstances for this comparison? Is it comparing uses, comparing durability, comparing safety, and so on? And the final step is to check if there is a particular focus for what is being asked for. If safety was the circumstance of the question, as an example, then check to see if there is a particular focus around that safety. Once the question requirements have been determined, the answer can now be planned. And it's often useful to use a section of the space given for the notes. And here's one approach that could be taken to the plan. Use the space to draw a table with 3 columns. And in the first column, put the facts about the content area in the question. So if the topic area was on lipids, then some facts to include are that all lipids contain carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. They're generally insoluble in water, and so on. The second column is to consider the specific circumstances of the question. And how does that circumstance or situation affect the facts that have been given? Are some properties or features affected by the scenario? Are some of the properties or features advantaged or disadvantaged in that specific situation? And finally, it's decision time. What's the best decision to make with the reasons given? What determination has been drawn, and make sure you include justifications. In this example of a healthcare science question, a workbench has become contaminated with radioactive material which is emitting both alpha and gamma radiation. Monitor readings that were taken throughout the day are shown on a graph. The question goes on to say that the lab is closed at weekends, and so the manager is considering two options to deal with the spill. These are 1. Staff decontaminate the workbench now, or 2. Temporarily seal the lab and resume work on Monday. The question then asks, using knowledge of radiation and half-life, to evaluate the best option. First, we need to identify the topic and content area that's being addressed, which is particles and radiation. Secondly, the circumstances. We know a radioactive material has been spilled, which is emitting both gamma and alpha radiation. And finally, we need to narrow the focus of our response on the two options provided when applying any knowledge. Using the steps from earlier, we now need to plan and formulate our extended answer. Firstly, it's important to identify the facts that are going to be applied in this question. As mentioned previously, these facts will apply to particles and radiation. Some examples of these points to be included from the mark scheme are: the half-life of a radioactive material is the time taken for the radioactivity to decrease by 50% or half. Gamma radiation has a very high penetration power. Gamma radiation is electromagnetic radiation and is low ionizing. Alpha radiation has low penetrating power and a low range at 1 to 2 centimeters, but is highly ionizing. Next, we have to consider the application of these points. So how does the previous knowledge mentioned, covered, apply to this situation? Some examples of this have been taken from the mark scheme, such as the half-life of the material is around 4.5 hours. Within 48 hours, the amount of radiation would have effectively reached zero. The gamma radiation being emitted can easily enter the body and cause damage. More examples from the mark scheme can be seen on the screen. Finally, we need to be clear on the outcomes of all the information that has been provided. In this example, there needs to be a clear evaluation given of the best option. Some examples of the evaluation taken from the mark scheme for this question are: option 2 would be better, as a negligible amount of radioactivity will remain by Monday morning, due to the radioactive decay with a short half-life. Option 2 would be better, as gamma radiation poses a risk to those decontaminating the workbench, and exposure is not necessarily due to the short half-life. More examples from the mark scheme can be seen on screen. Having used those steps to formulate a coherent answer, it's important to then proofread the answer, helping to ensure no marks will be lost for poor quality written communication. When proofreading, it's important to check that the answer is well structured, using key words from the question and plain and direct language. Check that grammar has been used effectively. For example, are the full stops and commas in the right places? Ensure a range of appropriate technical terms have been used effectively. In this case, terms such as half-life, ionization, and alpha and gamma radiation. Thank you for watching, and we hope you have found this video useful.